Vethsaran had assumed the assignment would take 3 days. That was the assumption every investigator from the Compact's Office of Strategic Audit carried into a routine retrospective. 3 days, a clear chain of procurement irregularities, a report filed, a transfer approved, and then the next assignment waiting in the queue. Vethsaran had conducted 41 such retrospectives in the preceding 11 years. They had never taken longer than 4 days. The file on Commander Elena Reyes of the Terran Coalition had arrived flagged as low complexity. One human officer, one lateral transfer, one administrative reassignment. The summary notation at the top of the file read, "Subject removed from active command following the Vethara corridor incident. Placed in logistics coordination. Inactive. No further incidents of note." Vethsaran was now sitting in a borrowed office on Compact Station, Mile 7 in the 9th day of what had been a 3-day assignment, and the word inactive was the reason. The file was wrong, not falsified. Wrong in the specific way that files become wrong when the person compiling them does not understand what they are looking at. The first document Vethsaran had flagged was a procurement authorization dated 14 months after Reyes had been assigned to the logistics desk. It was a small thing, a request to reclassify 17 decommissioned compact pattern cargo haulers from salvage category to maintenance hold. The authorization bore the signature of Sub-Administrator Dorvek of Compact Logistics Station 9, and beneath it, in the secondary endorsement field, where human coalition officers coordinating with compact supply chains were required to countersign, was a single line of neat handwriting. E. Reyes, LCC, Terran Coalition Liaison Logistics. The reclassification was not unusual. Cargo haulers moved between categories routinely. What was unusual was the notation in the attached maintenance schedule, a notation so small and procedurally formatted that it would read as routine to anyone scanning at speed. The notation read, "Drive core retention. Pending inspection cycle 2. Drive cores on salvage category haulers were not retained. They were stripped within the first processing cycle, sold as components, and logged out of inventory. There was no inspection cycle 2 for salvage vessels. There was no reason to retain drive cores unless you intended to use them." Vethsaran had pulled the follow-up records. Drive cores retained. 17 of them. Logged under a maintenance subcategory code that had been created 8 months prior by a compact clerical amendment, an amendment so minor it had passed on consent calendar without any voting member reading it. The amendment allowed drive components under active inspection, holds to be stored in bonded logistics facilities rather than strip parts warehouses, which meant they remained on the vessel manifest rather than being liquidated into raw inventory. One clerical amendment, 17 drive cores, and then Vethsaran had gone looking for who had submitted the amendment's original language to the Compact Clerical Subcommittee. The submission had come through a Terran Coalition Administrative Liaison Office. Vethsaran had set down the data tablet at that point, looked at the wall of the borrowed office for a moment, and then gone back to the beginning of the file. That had been 6 days ago. The file on Commander Elena Reyes did not describe a human officer who had been contained. It described a human officer who had been given a different instrument, and had spent 9 years learning how to play it with more precision than anyone in the Compact's Office of Strategic Audit had thought to measure. The question Vethsaran could not yet answer was not how she had done it. The how was becoming clear, document by document, in a way that was almost elegant if you could set aside the fact that the entire compact logistics coordination structure had been used as the mechanism. The question was when she had decided to do it. Whether it had been a plan from the moment Sub-Administrator Dorvek had signed the transfer order, or whether it had been something that grew in the space the desk created, the way certain organisms only flower in the dark. That question mattered, because the answer would determine what kind of person Elena Reyes was, and what kind of person she was would determine what Veth Sarin wrote in the conclusion of the report. And the conclusion of the report would determine rather a lot of things. The file on the Vethara corridor incident was the place to start, not because the incident itself was the central matter, since the official record had been reviewed and confirmed twice, and the outcome of the Board of Review was not in dispute. Commander Elena Reyes had, during a joint patrol operation in the Vethara corridor, diverted 3 Terran coalition fast response vessels from their assigned station positions to Interk. EPT, a civilian convoy that was not, at the time, flagged as being in distress. She had done this without authorization. The convoy had subsequently come under attack from Keth raiders, and the 3 vessels had responded in time to prevent a massacre of approximately 4,000 civilian lives. The board had commended her judgment and then censured her for the protocol violation. The censure had been a formality, if a genuine one. Protocols existed for reasons. The fact that breaking one had saved lives did not mean the protocol was wrong. Veth Sarin understood this. What the board had perhaps not fully weighed was the specific nature of the protocol violation, which Veth Sarin had spent 2 of the 9 days examining carefully. Reyes had not broken the protocol impulsively. The convoy was not flagged as in distress. It was not broadcasting any emergency signal. It was not on any intelligence watch list. The attack had not yet occurred. There was nothing in the standard monitoring sweep of the Vethara corridor that would have indicated to any reasonable officer that those 4,000 people were 47 minutes away from dying. Except one thing. The convoy's registered cargo manifest listed the hauler configurations as Veth pattern commercial freighters, 3-axle drive systems, rated for the corridor transit at 0.4 standard gravity compensation. The approved transit window for that section of the corridor was a low turbulence window rated at 0.6 standard gravity compensation minimum. Veth pattern 3-axle freighters at 0.4 compensation would not survive the transit window. They would either have to hold outside the corridor until the next approved window, which was 11 hours away, or they had made an error in their manifest. If they had made an error in their manifest, that meant one of 2 things. They were carrying a different, heavier drive configuration than listed, which would mean their manifest was fraudulent, and they were likely running contraband. Or they were carrying exactly what the manifest listed, and someone had approved an impossible transit window, which meant either clerical error or someone had created a gap in the approved transit schedule for them to pass through without being properly flagged. Reyes had noticed the discrepancy between the manifest drive rating and the transit window approval. She had flagged it through proper channels at 09:14 station time. She had received no response by 09:47. The convoy entered the corridor transit at 10:02. She diverted the fast response vessels at 10:04. The Keth raiders were already inside the corridor. They had used the same gap in the transit schedule. They had known the gap was there because someone had put it there for them. Reyes had not known any of this. She had known that a manifest did not match a transit window, that her flag had not been answered, and that the gap in the schedule was, under any explanation, a gap that needed something in it. She had put her ships in the gap. What the Board of Review's deposition transcripts showed, and what Veth Sarin had read 3 times to be certain of, was how Reyes had described the decision when asked to account for it. The board's presiding officer had asked her directly, "What made you believe the convoy was in danger?" She had not answered immediately. The deposition record noted a pause of 11 seconds. Then she had answered, and her answer was not what the board had expected, which was perhaps why they had not fully known what to do with it. She had not believed the convoy was in danger. She had believed the schedule was wrong in a way that would only exist if someone had made it wrong deliberately, and a deliberate wrong in a transit schedule served one purpose. She had not moved to protect the convoy. She had moved to occupy the gap before something else did. The board had found this unsatisfying as an explanation. It did not fit the protocol violation framework they were working with because the protocol violation framework assumed that she had made an emotional judgment about a civilian convoy in distress. She had not. She had read a manifest. She had read a transit window. She had done arithmetic. The arithmetic showed a gap. The gap meant someone was coming through it. She had been in the right place when they arrived. The Board of Review had reviewed the incident as a protocol violation. It was a protocol violation. It was also something else, and the something else was the thing Veth Sarin now understood was the engine that ran under everything in Elena Reyes' file. She did not react to what was in front of her. She reacted to the shape of what was missing. The desk job had been Sub-Administrator Dorvik's idea. This was documented. Dorvik had submitted the reassignment recommendation to the Terran Coalition's Joint Command Liaison Office 11 days after the Board of Review's censure, and the language of the recommendation was precise in a way that suggested it had been carefully considered. The recommendation read, "Given the Board's findings, it is the position of this office that Commander Reyes would benefit from a period of structured administrative responsibility, allowing for continued contribution to joint operations, while reinforcing the importance of protocol adherence through direct experience of the systems that protocols are designed to protect." Structured administrative responsibility. Veth Sarin had read that phrase several times. There was a document attached to the recommendation that was not part of the official file, but had been recovered from the Compact's administrative archive during the audit. It was a message sent from Sub-Administrator Dorvik's personal terminal to his immediate supervisor on the same day he submitted the recommendation. It was not a formal communication. It was flagged in the archive as incidental correspondence. It read, "She is too unpredictable for field command. The desk will settle her. These humans need structure when they get ideas above their role. I have put her somewhere she cannot make decisions that matter." Veth Sarin had looked at that message for a long time. Then Veth Sarin had gone back to the procurement records. The desk assignment had taken effect on the first day of what the Terran calendar marked as a new year. Elena Reyes had reported to Logistics Coordination Station 9, the facility attached to Compact Logistics Station 9, where Dorvik's office was located, and she had begun her assignment as Terran Coalition Liaison, Logistics. Her role was to serve as the coordination point between Terran Coalition resupply requests and the Compact's logistics infrastructure. She would review supply requests. She would countersign authorizations. She would ensure that coalition vessels drew their materials from the correct depots, filed the correct forms, and cleared the correct inspection holds before departing. She was very good at it. This was the first thing that had made Dorvik's office take note, approximately 6 months into the assignment. Veth Sarin had found the internal memo, a brief note from Dorvik's logistics coordinator to Dorvik himself, noting that the Terran liaison had reduced processing times for coalition supply requests by 31% through a combination of pre-clearance batching, and what the coordinator described as an unusual familiarity with the structure of the Compact's inspection hold categories. Dorvik had written one word in the margin of that memo. Good. Veth Sarin had found this quietly painful to read. There was a personnel photo in the file, standard issue from the Terran Coalition's administrative registry, required of all liaison officers assigned to joint operations stations. It had been taken on the day Reyes reported to Logistics Coordination Station 9. She was standing in what appeared to be a processing corridor, the kind of non-space that exists in every administrative facility in every civilization that has ever needed to move personnel from one classification to another. She was in uniform. Her expression was not the expression of someone arriving at a punishment. It was not the expression of someone arriving at a consolation prize. It was the expression of someone who had just walked into a room full of instruments and was taking inventory. Vethsaran had looked at that photograph for a long time and then set it aside, because the investigation was about documents and records, not about faces. But the photograph was the thing that made the rest of the file cohere. The photograph was the reason Vethsaran kept returning to the word inactive in the original file summary and feeling the specific discomfort of a word that described the wrong thing. Because by the time Dorvek wrote that word, Reyes had already submitted the clerical amendment to the Compact Clerical Subcommittee. She had already arranged for 17 decommissioned cargo haulers to retain their drive cores under the maintenance hold subcategory she had created, and she had already begun the second step. The second step was hull integrity documentation. Salvage category vessels that retained components under active maintenance holds were required to maintain hull integrity certifications, because the Compact's liability framework distinguished between components stored in intact vessels and components stored in stripped hulls. Components in intact hulls were considered bonded to the vessel manifest. Components in stripped hulls were considered loose salvage. The difference in liability classification was significant. The difference in access for maintenance purposes was also significant. Intact hulls could be accessed for maintenance. Stripped hulls could not, without a separate salvage retrieval authorization. Reyes had ensured the hulls remained intact. She had done this by submitting them for a hull integrity review through the Terran Coalition's Engineering Review Board, using a provision in the Joint Operations Protocol that allowed coalition engineering teams to conduct assessments on vessels that were scheduled for potential coalition acquisition. The vessels were not actually scheduled for coalition acquisition, but the provision did not require that they be acquired. It required only that they be under consideration. She had put them under consideration. The engineering teams had inspected the hulls and filed integrity certifications. The certifications had been filed with the Compact's Logistics Authority as required. The vessels were now intact, certified, drive core equipped, and sitting in bonded storage on maintenance hold. They were not technically a fleet, but they could become one faster than any fleet the Compact's logistics system would normally allow. Vethsaran had reached this point in the reconstruction on day 4 and had needed to stop and sit with it for a while, not because it was difficult to understand, because it was not difficult to understand, and that was the thing that required sitting with. The desk, as Dorvek had conceived it, was a location, a fixed point, a place where a person processed requests that other people made and approved movements that other people planned. The desk was not supposed to be an instrument of anything except routine. The desk was supposed to occupy Reyes the way water occupies a vessel, filling the available space and going no further. What Dorvek had not considered was that the desk was, in the specific sense that mattered, the logistics infrastructure of the Compact. And Elena Reyes was a person who looked at systems and saw the shape of what was missing. She had looked at the desk and seen what it could move. This was what Vethsaran had named in the margin notes of the investigation file as the desk that moved, not the desk that was a prison, which was how Dorvek had conceived it, not the desk that was a consolation, which was how the Board of Review had perhaps intended it. The desk that moved, the fixed point from which everything else was leveraged. Year 3 of the assignment had brought a development that Dorvek's office had registered as a minor administrative variance, and which Vethsaran now understood as the central mechanism of the entire operation. Reyes had requested and been granted access to the Compact's long-range resupply forecasting system. The system was not classified. It was the administrative database used by logistics coordinators to project supply needs for joint operations theaters 6 to 18 months in advance. Every logistics liaison had access to it. It was, in practical terms, a scheduling tool. You put in the projected operational requirements for a theater, and the system returned estimated resupply timelines and depot allocation recommendations. Reyes had used it as a map. The forecasting system contained the projected operational posture of every joint operations theater in the Compact Coalition Cooperative Zone for the next 18 months. It contained the projected fleet positions, the projected supply line vulnerabilities, the projected windows during which specific theaters would be either overstocked or understocked based on operational tempo. It was all administrative. It was all routine. It was the kind of data that logistics coordinators used to ensure that the right ammunition reached the right depot before the right ships needed to draw from it. It was the kind of data that logistics coordinators used to ensure that the right ammunition reached the right depot before the right ships needed to draw from it. And it was also, if you were a person who read the shape of what was missing, a complete picture of where a fleet would need to be deployed, how it would need to be supplied, and what gaps in the existing force structure would be most critical to fill in the next 18 months. Reyes had spent year 3 reading that map. In year 4, she had begun making requests. Not for ships, not for weapons, not for anything that would have appeared on a strategic acquisition list. She had made requests for personnel cross-training authorizations. These were routine in joint operations environments. Compact personnel cross-trained with coalition personnel regularly, for the practical reason that vessels from both organizations sometimes needed to operate in coordination, and it helped to have crews who understood each other's equipment. Reyes's requests were modest. A compact drive systems engineer to conduct a 3-week cross-training with a coalition engineering team. A coalition navigation officer to attend a compact astrogation certification course. Small exchanges, individually unremarkable. Vethsarin had counted them. Over 4 years, working through standard cross-training authorization channels from her logistics desk, Elena Reyes had arranged the cross-training of 93 personnel, compact engineers who now knew how to operate coalition drive systems. Coalit. Ion navigators who held compact astrogation certifications. Coalition hull technicians who were certified on compact hull integrity inspection protocols. 93 people who could crew a ship that was half compact configuration and half coalition configuration, without needing a transition period. The 17 cargo haulers in maintenance hold on Compact Station 9 had compact drive cores. If they were ever commissioned into active service, they would need crews who understood compact drive systems. 93 people understood compact drive systems now. Vethsarin had sat with that for a long time too. Year 6 had brought the first moment in the file where something had almost gone wrong. Dorvek's logistics coordinator, the same one who had noted the 31% efficiency improvement in year 1, had filed a query regarding the cross-training authorization volume from Reyes's desk. The query was not suspicious. It was the kind of query a diligent administrator files when they notice a pattern that falls outside standard variance. The coordinator had noted that the cross-training request rate from the Terran liaison office was running at approximately 4 times the rate of any comparable joint operations logistics desk, and had asked whether this represented a new policy directive or should be reviewed. The query had gone to Dorvek. Dorvek had forwarded it to Reyes for explanation. Reyes had responded the same day. The response was 3 sentences. The first sentence noted that cross-training authorization requests were within the scope of the logistics liaison role as defined in the Joint Operations Protocol. The second sentence noted that elevated cross-training volumes typically preceded periods of increased joint operational activity, as cross-trained personnel improved coordination efficiency by a statistically measurable margin. The third sentence attached a citation from the Compact's own operational efficiency review board supporting this claim. Dorvek had written the query off as resolved and filed a note that the Terran liaison was performing beyond expectations. He had still not understood what he was looking at. Year 7 was where the second layer became visible, and it was the layer that had required most of Vethsaren's remaining investigation time, because it was the most subtle and, in retrospect, the most decisive. In Year 7, Reyes had begun filing what the Compact's administrative system categorized as theater readiness assessments. These were standard documents in the logistics coordination workflow. They were essentially position papers, written by logistics coordinators, summarizing the projected readiness of a given operational theater for various categories of joint operations activity over the coming 6 to 12 months. They were administrative documents. They informed scheduling. They did not drive strategy. Except that the theater readiness assessments written by Elena Reyes were not the same as the theater readiness assessments written by anyone else in the logistics coordination system. The difference was not in their conclusions. The difference was in their structure. A standard theater readiness assessment described what was present, depot inventory at this level, fleet positioning at these coordinates, resupply timeline of this duration. Reyes' assessments described what was present and what that meant for what was missing. She described not just the current readiness state, but the consequence of the current readiness state, specifically what would happen in each theater if a particular type of operational demand arose, and the existing force structure was required to respond to it. She was describing vulnerabilities, precisely, with the kind of specificity that came from having spent 4 years reading the forecasting system map and 2 years quietly assembling the crew roster for a response she had not yet named. The assessments were good. This was the most unsettling part of them, from Vethsaren's perspective as an investigator. They were not good in the way that administrative documents are described as good, meaning thorough and properly formatted and filed on time. They were good in the way that operational intelligence is good. They identified the real problem rather than the apparent problem. They quantified risk in ways that made the risk legible to people who had not been looking at it. A compact fleet admiral reading one of Reyes' assessments would not feel they were reading a logistics coordinator's paperwork. They would feel they were reading someone who understood the theater. Which was the point? Reyes had not been trying to influence logistics. She had been trying to reach the people who made decisions about deployment, and the only instrument available to a logistics coordinator was the assessment documents that landed on those people's desks. So she had made the assessments worth reading. She had made them the clearest, most precise articulation of the operational problem available in the planning system. And then she had waited for someone to read them and ask the right question. She had waited 2 years. The admiral had asked the right question. The assessments circulated through the Compact strategic planning offices as administrative background documents. In Year 8, 3 of them had been cited in formal strategic planning sessions as unusually useful contextual documents. One had been cited by a Compact fleet admiral who had written in the session minutes that the logistics liaison's framing of the Dorvek Passage readiness gap was the clearest articulation of that vulnerability the admiral had seen. The admiral's name was in the session minutes. The minutes were administrative records. The administrative records were accessible to the logistics liaison who managed the filing systems that fed into the strategic planning session documentation. Reyes had known her assessment was cited. She had known the admiral's name. She had known the admiral found her framing useful. In Year 8, Month 4, a request had arrived on Reyes' logistics desk for the pre-certification inspection of 17 decommissioned cargo haulers, currently on maintenance hold at Compact Station 9. The request had come from the office of the Fleet Admiral. The Admiral's office had been looking. It emerged in the documentation for vessels that could be rapidly commissioned into a secondary logistics and light escort configuration for deployment to the Dorvek Passage Theater, where the readiness gap identified in the theater readiness assessment was projected to become operationally significant within the next 14 months. The Admiral's office had run an availability query through the Compact's logistics system, and the 17 cargo haulers had surfaced as the closest match to the required configuration in the nearest depot cluster. Drive cores intact. Hull certifications current. Available for pre-commissioning inspection on 14 days' notice. The Admiral had asked how long full commission readiness would take. The pre-commissioning inspection report had been filed by a Compact logistics coordinator. It had noted that the vessel's drive cores were in excellent condition, that the hull certifications were current, and that the cross-training certifications on file indicated that a crew pool with the relevant mixed configuration competencies was available within the Joint Operations Personnel Registry. 93 people, available, certified, ready. The report had estimated full commission readiness at 11 weeks. The standard commission timeline for vessels of this class from salvage category was 22 months. The Admiral had approved the commission in the same session. By year 9, what had been 17 decommissioned cargo haulers in maintenance hold was Coalition Fleet 7. 7 fast escort carriers and 10 converted logistics vessels, fully crewed, commissioned under Compact Coalition Joint Authorization, assigned to the Dorvek Passage Theater, and placed under the command of the officer whose theater readiness assessment had first identified the need they now filled. The commission order listed the commanding officer as Commander Elena Reyes of the Terran Coalition. No longer of logistics, no longer of the desk. Vethsarin closed the final document in the file and looked at the wall of the borrowed office for what was probably the last time. The named concept, the thing that Vethsarin had been turning over since day 4, was clear enough now. The desk that moved, the fixed point that became a lever, the assignment that was supposed to contain a variable and instead gave that variable 9 uninterrupted years of access to every system it needed. The report was going to be complicated to write, not factually complicated. The facts were documented. The timeline was reconstructed and arithmetically sound. Nothing in Elena Reyes' conduct had been unauthorized. Every procurement reclassification had passed through proper channels. Every cross-training authorization had been within the scope of her defined role. Every assessment had been a standard administrative document. Every citation in the planning sessions had been solicited by the people doing the citing. The report was going to be complicated because it was going to have to conclude something, and the conclusion had 2 possible shapes. Vethsarin had been conducting audits for 11 years. In 11 years, the purpose of an audit was to find what had gone wrong and name it. The naming was the product. The naming allowed the system to correct. This was how institutions maintained themselves, not by being perfect, but by having a mechanism for identifying imperfection and closing the gap. The problem with the file on Elena Reyes was that nothing had gone wrong. Every gap she had found was a real gap. Every system she had leveraged was functioning exactly as designed. Every authorization she had obtained had been properly obtained. The cross-training requests were within scope. The maintenance hold subcategory was procedurally sound. The hull certifications were legitimate. The theater readiness assessments were accurate. The audit had found no irregularities. It had found something considerably stranger. A human officer who had used 9 years of access to a bureaucratic system to build exactly what the bureaucratic system needed, without anyone in the bureaucratic system understanding what she was building until it was built. The report was going to be complicated because it was going to have to conclude something, and the conclusion had 2 possible shapes. One shape was, the Compact's logistics coordination system contains vulnerabilities that allow a sufficiently determined individual to leverage administrative access in ways that produce strategic outcomes without formal authorization. Recommend review of cross-training authorization protocols and theater readiness assessment distribution scope. The other shape was, The compact removed a strategically valuable officer from field command for correctly reading a situation her superiors had missed and placed her in an environment where she had 9 years and a complete logistics infrastructure to prove that she was better at this than anyone had understood. The Dorvek Passage is now defended. Fleet 7 is fully operational. The officer in question has demonstrated a form of institutional precision that has no name in any protocol manual. Vethsaran thought about Sub-Administrator Dorvek's message, the one that had called the desk a place where she could not make decisions that matter. Vethsaran thought about the clerical amendment, the maintenance hold subcategory, the hull certifications, the cross-training rosters, the theater readiness assessments, the admiral who had cited the readiness gap and asked how quickly 17 haulers could be commissioned. 11 weeks instead of 22 months. Because all the pieces were already in place. Because someone had spent 9 years at a desk, finding every joint in the system and pressing precisely on each one, so quietly and so procedurally that no one had thought to call it anything except good administrative performance. The report Vethsaran wrote was 11 pages. It documented the full sequence. It made 2 recommendations. The first was a review of administrative access parameters for logistics liaison positions across all joint operations stations. The second recommendation was 3 words. Promote Commander Reyes. Vethsaran filed the report on the 9th day. On the way out of the borrowed office, passing the corridor that led to Compact Station 9's main logistics floor, Vethsaran paused. The logistics floor was visible through the viewing panel. Rows of workstations, coordinators at their desks, the hum of a system that processed 10,000 supply requests a day, each one moving through its proper channel, each one authorized and stamped and filed and forgotten. It looked like a place where nothing happened. It was the most dangerous room Vethsaran had ever walked past. And the reason it was dangerous was still out there, commanding a fleet in the Dorvek Passage, doing something else that no one had yet thought to measure, and the assumption that she had run out of instruments was, Vethsaran now understood with complete clarity, the same assumption Dorvek had made on the day he signed the desk assignment. It had taken 3 days to make that mistake. It had taken 9 years to understand what the mistake had built. If this one stayed with you, you already know why. Someone saw a desk as a punishment, and the person sitting at it saw it as the only instrument she was going to need. That gap between what a system is designed to contain and what a patient, precise mind can quietly do with it is not a science fiction idea. You have felt it. At some point in your life, you were put somewhere smaller than you were, and you had to decide whether the room defined you or you defined the room. Stay human.